For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Books Corner on StratNews Global. I am Surya Gangadharan, and my guest this evening is Vikram Singh Mehta, many of whom would find his name familiar. He's the author of the book that we are going to discuss today, The Next Stop: Natural Gas and India's Journey to a Clean Energy Future. Mr. Mehta, good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Surya. It's my pleasure.
So we are talking a lot about renewable energy these days. The government has set a target of 450 gigawatts of renewable power by 2030. Given that you're pushing gas, what's the reason?
I'm not pushing gas because I am opposed to renewables. I'm pushing gas because the leapfrog from our current fossil fuel-based economic and energy system to a clean energy system is going to be exceedingly difficult. We will need to move in that direction, and we must move in that direction step by step. And the first step, or the next stop, should be to increase the usage of the greenest of fossil fuels, and that is natural gas. So my book is essentially to provide a roadmap that can move the Indian economy incrementally towards a system that is heavily dependent on clean energy, renewable energy. But the milestone to cross will be, or should be, natural gas.
Now, what does gas bring to the table? I know it's clean. You mentioned that before in your book. Is it abundant? Is it easily accessible? Do we have it in some quantities, commercially exploitable quantities in India?
Well, all of that and more. It is a versatile fuel. It has many uses: mobility, industry, industrial heating. It is also the greenest of fossil fuels. It is more available within our sedimentary basins than oil. There have been more large discoveries of natural gas in recent years than that of oil. It is also readily accessible within the region, the South Asian, Southeast Asian, and Middle Eastern region that surround the Indian subcontinent. And it is more competitive than oil. So for India, the logic for increasing the usage of natural gas would be, it would in a way allow us to diversify our sources of energy from simply the Middle East to other countries, especially Australia, Malaysia, and further afield, America, which has become an exporter of natural gas. It would also allow us to shift, as I said earlier, towards a greener fossil fuel system. And we do have, we have created the infrastructure for importing natural gas and for transporting it. So for all of these various reasons, there is a logic in looking at natural gas as our next stop.
So I've referred to the executive summary in your book. You mentioned here that in recent years, the fundamental reason for its flat and in recent years declining shape is because the bulk of gas reserves are found in complex geologies and inhospitable locations. This is India. Is it offshore? Is it onshore?
Surya, it's actually both. Onshore, it would be like the Himalayan foothills, like the northeast of India. And offshore, it would be the deeper waters. But all in all, the reality for India is that we have 26 sedimentary basins. We do have hydrocarbon reserves and resources, but the probability of locating those hydrocarbon resources is not that great. And the probability of developing those hydrocarbon resources once located is even lower. So we are not sitting on a sea of hydrocarbons. We are therefore dependent increasingly on imports. And this applies both to oil and to natural gas.
Yeah. So, in that sense, even if we move to gas, the dependence on an external supplier will continue. That won't change.
Yes. That unfortunately is the case. Um, but as I said earlier, Surya, there have been some major discoveries of gas in recent years, especially offshore the eastern coast. But in very high temperature, in deep waters, high pressure, high temperature sort of finding discoveries, which make it exceedingly expensive to develop and commercialize. But there are that we have had more discoveries of that nature in natural gas than we have had of oil. But you're absolutely right. Whichever fossil fuel we take, other than coal, we will be dependent on imports. The big question is whether we should be dependent on a handful of countries in the Middle East for our oil imports, especially countries that are facing political challenges, or whether we should diversify our supply sources, our import sources. And natural gas allows us to diversify our supply sources at economically competitive rates.
I would presume that the closer the gas is to our shores, the cheaper it gets. Is that how it works? It's
Not,
like, so we
not,
may end
not.
up. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, but the freight costs are a small percentage of the total cost of import. So we are able to import from America gas at fairly competitive rates. By the way, you are talking to me at a time when gas prices have actually gone through the roof. So
Oh,
anyone hearing us at this point in time will
yeah.
shake their head in wonder. But I'm taking a slightly longer term perspective, okay? And if you take a slightly longer term perspective, my own personal view is that you're going to find gas prices softening considerably. And at that point, we will have opportunities to access gas from the USA, from Australia, from Southeast Asia, and of course, from the Middle East. But we will not be dependent on one geographic region for our source of energy.
So, how cheap is this going to be, or how reasonable is it going to be, or affordable? Because I understand the infrastructure for such gas networks is pretty large investment.
Again, you're right. But let me just separate your question. Firstly, how cheap will it be? We don't know. How affordable will it be? We can say that it probably will not be as affordable as domestic coal, especially if coal is going into power generation at the pit head. On the other hand, if you were to price coal for its externalities or dis-externalities, the pollution impact, you might find that gas prices become quite competitive against coal. Um, will it be affordable? That's a big question. That affordability is really dependent on on the consumer, the purchasing power of the consumer, and we have a very that's an issue for most of our consumers. But the fact of the matter is that uh, gas infrastructure has been built to a large extent. We have 17,000 kilometers of gas pipelines under construction, and we have already built 13,000. So together, we will soon have a national pipeline grid that will be able to bring gas from the import point where it will be regasified, because gas will come in the in the form of liquefied natural gas. It'll get regasified at the point of import, or the production point, or sorry, at the import point, and then it will be transported by pipeline across the country. We don't have a national gas grid right now, but that is well underway. The construction is well underway. So the infrastructure is expensive, but a large part of the infrastructure costs have been sunk.
So gas hasn't really taken off in India, has it? I mean, you enumerated many reasons in your book. Could you explain to the viewer why gas hasn't taken off?
Well, the first reason is that gas was always a kind of a second cousin to oil. So oil companies looked for oil because it is easier to produce and store and ship. Um, and if they found gas, they would either keep it in the ground, or if the gas was found in association with oil, they would flare it. Now, that's the situation that was prevailing, I'd say, in the 60s, 70s, and maybe only a part of the 80s. But gas then acquired value, okay? Gas, and at that point, the reason why India did not actually build up its gas production profile was twofold. One was that there was insufficient investment in creating a gas pipeline. The only gas pipeline that was created, and that too after 20 years, so 15 years after we found the first major gas field offshore Mumbai, was the
Yeah.
gas pipeline that linked Hazira to UP, Jagdishpur. So, and there was no further investment made. So even if you had gas, you couldn't bring it to the consumer. So that was the one major reason. The second reason was, of course, gas was not competitive against coal. So gas for power was not a viable option. It still is not, in fact, a competitive option. But yet, power generation has been the anchor customer for gas in other countries. And the same applied to industry and fertilizers. So those are the three reasons, Surya, why gas didn't really pick up. One was the lack of investment, I mean, the lack or the absence of investment in infrastructure. The second was the uncompetitiveness of or uncompetitiveness of gas vis-a-vis other fuels. And the third was, and that's a kind of an ancient reason, that we were oil companies weren't looking for gas.
So recently, Reliance announced a huge investment in hydrogen, and there's all this talk of hydrogen being the future energy for India. Is the natural gas one step in that direction?
Yes, because to produce hydrogen, so you can either produce it, you split water through the process of electrolysis. Now you can split water by using gas or renewables. So, or you can use the other fuels, more dirtier fuels. So the fact is, brown hydrogen is when you split it with the use of gas, and green hydrogen would be if you are actually using renewables to generate hydrogen. Now, ideally, we should be moving towards green hydrogen, and that is the objective of the government of India. So, but if you could argue that gas could also be a source, could be used creating hydrogen or generating hydrogen. But it would be, as I said, brown hydrogen.
So, in your view, is the government actually moving towards the ultimate destination is a gas, hydrogen?
Yeah, the ultimate destination, Surya, is of course to create a clean energy system that is predominantly based on renewable energy, clean energy, solar, wind, and other sources of clean energy. Um, that's our ultimate. But the big challenge that we face, and in fact other countries face, when you make an energy transition, when you look to transform your economic system, is how do you actually create or how do you re-engineer the existing infrastructure? So today,
Yeah,
our infrastructure is completely based on fossil fuels,
yeah.
and you can't just overnight switch, them to a different energy source. I'll give you a statistic that will be very revealing. So in 1885, if I'm not wrong, Edison illuminated the lower half of Manhattan in New York. Okay. It took America another 40 years. It was not till 1930, 35 that all of the factories in America shifted from steam power to electric power. And the reason why that was the case was because none of these, or many of these factories were not designed for electric power. So they had to be either redesigned or completely rebuilt. So just imagine that, situation for India. Our entire economic system, our entire energy system is built on coal, oil, and gas. Of course, these are commercial. Then you have the
Yeah.
non-commercial fuels, but we're not talking about that for the moment. Now, you tell me how we're going to move that system towards one that can, grow on the back of renewables. It's going to take decades, and it's going to take trillions of dollars, not hundreds of millions. It could take trillions of dollars to do that over the next 3 or 4 decades. So in the interim, that's my whole point. In the interim, you can't continue to just rely on existing sources of energy, which is coal and oil, because you are facing a massive environmental challenge. You need
Yeah.
to you take every step possible to shift away from dirty fuel to cleaner fuel, even if in the process of doing that, you move from one fossil to another fossil. And in the next stop really is all about, look, the next step has to be to increase the use of gas, which is a cleaner fuel, because that at least pushes you further down the pathway towards a cleaner energy system.
So, what is the kind of money and investments we are looking at here? Say over spread out over the next decade, perhaps.
Oh, I wish I could give you a number and say that that's more than an educated guess. But I can't. I mean, I can tell you that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, has actually estimated that I think they've estimated that India will need to spend 180 to 200 billion dollars
But
annually just to start that process of change. But I'm going even one step further than that. I'm saying that if you want to scale up solar, if you want to scale up wind, you need to really look at almost redeveloping your entire power value chain.
yeah,
You will
yeah,
need to
absolutely.
look at a completely different generation of power. The transmission network will have to be strengthened, maybe rebuilt. You'll need to install smart meters. And then we come to the consumers. You'll have to actually redesign buildings, you'll have to redesign industry, and the major challenge, you'll have to redesign mobility. Because 40% of our oil today is used for mobility. And then, of course, gas cannot substitute for oil across the mobility value chain, because heavy industry. I mean, you can't use gas right now under the present technology for long distance transport or for airlines. Um, so these are big challenges, and we should be very clear. We're not going to. I don't think we're going to come to a situation where fossil fuel has been removed from the energy basket and replaced totally by renewables.
You think this government is prepared to bite the bullet and go forward on this? Do you find indications this is the case?
Yeah. No, I find indications. I mean, the fact that they've presented themselves with a massive challenge of
Yeah,
tripling the capacity from 175 to 450, even when they
yeah.
haven't reached the first target of 175, is an indication of intent. Okay, it's an indication of ambition. So let's commend them or compliment them at least for that. Okay, the real question is, have they put in place the ecosystem, the institutional mechanisms for for accelerating this transition, for implementing this transition? And here I have a major concern, and a concern that I've outlined in my book, and also, of course, verbally. And it is not to do with economics. It's not to do with the source of energy itself. It's to do with the nature of governance. Today in India, we have, I think at last count, 7 different ministries that are involved directly and indirectly with energy, you know. And we don't have, can you believe it? We don't even have one person in the country other than the Prime Minister who is accountable for energy policy. You could argue that Niti Aayog is, but the Niti Aayog is a think tank and it is not an executive body. So there is a man responsible for, minister responsible for petroleum, for coal, for
Yeah.
renewables, for power, for nuclear, but no one for energy. And yet, energy is all of that. You can't have an energy policy unless you create an institutional fora where everyone gets together and understands that energy must be looked at through a holistic, integrated prism. And so, my biggest concern when we talk about an energy transition, when we talk about a green transition, is that we haven't really put in place the mechanisms to implement some of the ideas contained in this book or contained in many other books or even articulated by government ministers, including the Prime Minister. And that's, I think, going to be the big challenge. Of course, the other challenge is going to be finance. We will have to recognize that money is going to be a big issue. We have to invest.
So I have a question here from one of our viewers, Senbaga Muttu Rahul. He says bureaucracy and politics between state and center is different story for this kind of ambition. Would you agree?
Yes, I agree, and I'm not sure where he's coming from, but of course, if he is suggesting that central politics or central bureaucrats and state bureaucrats are often at loggerheads with each other, he's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why gas pipelines get delayed is because gas is a central government, it comes under the central government, whereas the acquisition of land for laying a pipeline is the responsibility and of the state government. Now, if you have a central government run by, say, Party X and a state government run by Party Y,
Yeah.
you're going to have any number of issues, and that has happened more than once, by the way. So, and this is but just one example. So, center and state need to actually align. And that again goes back to the point I made about creating an institutional mechanism for decision making, because it's not just the fragmentation of decision making at the central government level, is the fact that this fragmentation is then overlaid by challenges between the center and the state. And then within the state governments, you also have a similar degree of fragmentation. So it's a it's a mess at times.
Completeness, yeah. And there's a whole lot of other issues, including reform of PSUs, ending all the multiplicity of ministries, kind of bringing them together. Those are other challenges.
Well, I said that, the multiplicity of ministries is really the problem in one at the decision making level. The PSUs, I'm actually quite an advocate of some of the PSUs. I find that the individuals working for PSUs are by and large as good, as good as people that I've come across in the private sector. The problem that happens is that the PSUs get strangulated by the bureaucracy. So
Yeah.
if you let ONGC run on its own without the Ministry of Petroleum uh, sitting on top of their head, I dare say that ONGC or Oil India or NTPC or any of these energy companies would produce results that would be comparable to what we are seeing in the private sector. But they cannot produce results if their entire future is dependent on an IAS officer at the level of a joint secretary who has 1 year of experience or less than 1 year of experience in oil and gas. And by the way, I
Yeah.
was formerly in the IAS, so I'm not trying to knock the IAS deliberately. Okay.
So, on that positive note, we are completely at the end of our time. We'll have to wind up. Mr. Vikram Singh Mehta, sir, thank you very much for your views and your insight. Glad to have you, and I think we'll have to continue this conversation in the future too, given the fact how the market is evolving and how the government policies are also evolving towards a more environment friendly direction. Thank you, sir. Glad to have you.
You're welcome, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us. Not too many questions this time, but glad to have you anyway. Some of your questions were interesting. And keep following us on Twitter, subscribe to our website, and do keep following us on Instagram. Thank you. Good night.